Welcome to Kaiser Watch with John Kaiser. I'm your host, Jim Goddard.
Welcome back to the show, John.
Jim, pleasure to be back on the show.
What's coming up today?
Well, today I am just going to talk about the James Bay Lithium Great Canadian Area play. This weekend is going to be the kickoff for what I think finally will be widespread Canadian recognition that this is an extraordinary play in their backyard, which may even be the last hurrah for the Canadian Resource Juniors.
So what's happening in the James Bay Lithium District?
Well, I created an index on August 1st, which features at present 54 companies that have ground in the James Bay region, which is it's part of so-called Plan Nord, but it's really the central part of Quebec, north of the whole Abitibi region, but south of the Nunavik region, which is way up north. The index since August 1st is down about 5%, so it's still kind of flatlining, but we have been dealing with the summer doldrums, and the fire restrictions have only finally been lifted everywhere in the past week. Companies have been putting out news releases saying we are mobilizing crews, but we really won't have any news flow until probably the middle of the month, when they've had a chance to track down these pegmatite outcrops that they've either seen from the satellite imagery or noted in past exploration work archives, and then we should start getting some seriously excitement in the market. But everything is not simple. The SOPFU fire map, when I last looked at it, August 23rd, and provided a copy for Kaiser Watch audience, back then it looked quite promising, but the fire restricts or the fire risk, much of it had become low, which was a blue color. Now it's turned green again, which is still moderate. And interestingly, the coastal part of the James Bay region, which was still high, the yellow color, it's now turned green. But there's this north-south band of yellow high-risk area that has moved eastward and occupies part of the western part of the James Bay. Now, the fires are no longer raging. They're no longer a problem. But the rains that were helping cool things off in past weeks have paused a bit. What we really need is a serious soaking of everything so that the fire risk for additional fires diminishes. Now, a new problem has started to emerge. There's a huge area. I think it's several million hectares has been burned in northern Quebec, and that's mostly in the James Bay area. And because we haven't had a proper soaking, which of course explains why there's still moderate to high fire risk, there's a lot of dry soot everywhere. And field workers are balking at going into these areas that have been burnt out because of there's so much soot airborne, and soot is of course carcinogenic. Now, in the old days, shady prospectors would during the summer, set fire to regions that they were interested in so that all the brush cover would get burnt off. And then next spring, summer, after the winter snow thaw and the rains have washed away all the soot, they would go out there prospecting for newly revealed outcrop. And because of the vast area in James Bay that has been burnt out, next summer is going to be a very prime prospecting season. But right now, it is problematic in those areas that are burnt out. So the boots on the ground are being steered towards those areas that weren't touched by fire. And in a lot of cases, these are the areas where the companies had already seen the pegmatites. It's more a problem for some of these companies at the state closology land, where the past exploration had not really focused on, because the greenstone belts weren't that very visible and prominently mapped. But those areas are probably compromised. But in the main areas, there are there are companies that have the boots on the ground, but even they are racing against the clock. Two of the companies, like as part of my process here of covering the whole, all these index members, all these 50 plus members, what they have, what they're doing, try and find the next $2 billion Corvette CD5 discovery. Remember, Rio Tinto says that the world needs 60 JDARs by 2035. A JDAR is equivalent to what Patriot battery metals delivered with the CV5 maiden resource estimate. And the James Bay district, we now have several world-class deposits in it, and they've only barely begun to look. So this is why I say the Canadians are going to be waking up in the fall that in their backyard is this extraordinary field of pegmatites that are lithium enriched that nobody has ever taken a serious look at, and the juniors are only starting now. They had a frustrating 3-month delay in getting the boots on the ground, but they're now heading into the field. We're talking about a market that was worth $200 million globally in 2005, being worth $200 billion by 2020, 30, 35 period, and that doesn't even include Toyota being correct that it has solved the solid-state lithium-ion battery problem so that you can use lithium metal in the anode. Imagine if by 2030, Toyota is selling Camrys and Corollas with 1,200-kilometer range and 10-minute charge as electric vehicles for the reasonable price that they sell them now. The demand is going to be even bigger. So this is unfolding in Canada's backyard, and all these juniors are now swarming in there. But as I started to say, nothing seems to be easy. Two of the companies that I focused on this week to do some more homework on, Ophir Gold and Q2 Metals, they own together about 25 to 30 kilometers of the Yasinski Greenstone Belt, where there is known lithium-bearing outcrop. They had 2 days in the field, and before they were chased out, they're hoping to be drilling by now. They now are back in the field, but they only have 2 weeks to get something done and can't be drilling until later in October, because guess what? In certain parts of the James Bay region, there is something called the moose hunting season, which runs from September 15th to October 15th. It's similar to the goose hunting season, which runs from April 15th to May 15th and shuts down that part of the year. And this is starting in parts of James Bay, not all, probably more on the western part, which is close to the coast where the First Nation communities are located. But they have 2 weeks to go in there and get something done and be ready for the last sort of 6 to 7 weeks of snow-free exploration in the James Bay area.
Why did Q2 Metals and Ophir Gold think they would be drilling by now?
This is part of the intriguing aspect of the whole James Bay story. Now, the region has seen exploration since the late 50s. It has been pretty unusual in the lack of significant deposits that became mines that have emerged from this region. The most recent is Eleanor, which are Virginia mines, found in the 80s, which Goldcorp bought for $750 million and developed for a couple $1 billion, and it has turned out not to be a money maker at all, and if found today, just might not clear the development hurdle. So the James Bay region has been a huge disappointment, despite intensive exploration by numerous companies looking mainly for gold and base metal deposits, typically associated with a number of the greenstone belts that are in the region. And in the course of doing this, the geologists would note, we got pegmatite here off to the side of this promising zone that we are going to drill, and come up with we came up with mediocre gold or copper values, no mine here. And all this ended up in the archives because the Canadian system requires the companies, as part of the deal, to have the mineral rights. They have to spend money, and they have to file reports about what the money accomplished. And this becomes part of a public good, so that even when they drop the claims because there was nothing worth developing there, geologists, prospectors can down the road rifle through these archives, study what was written, think about it in terms of new geological models and concepts, and perhaps revisit these areas and build on the knowledge that was created by past exploration. And it's an argument why what this Canadian ecosystem does is good. Even if most of them fail to deliver anything worthwhile, they are still creating a geological model base, not funded by the taxpayers, but funded by the risk dollars of speculators who once in a while get super rich as a result of something big being found. What makes the James Bay district so special is that we now know this area, while it's not a host for world-class base or precious metal deposits, at least not yet, it is a host for world-class lithium deposits, and these pegmatites are there. Most of the time, they were never assayed. They were just recorded as pegmatites. Sometimes the geologist had the skill set to recognize and say, oh, this one's got spodumene, which is the primary lithium mineral that you want. So the big game in the past 2 years has been to go in there and revisit these archives and acquire claims or option claims, stake them or option them, which were being held for gold or base metals, and rethink them in terms of lithium. And in this area, it had been explored, way back in the 1950s for gold and copper. In the case of the Radis property of Ophir Gold, which covers about the 15 kilometers of the northeast extension of the Yasinski Greenstone Belt. This property was generated by or acquired by East Main Resources back in 2005. This was when Don Robinson was in charge. His primary focus was the Eau Claire deposit, farther east in the James Bay region. East Main ended up being acquired in 2020 by Fury Gold Mines, which is primarily focused on gold exploration. And in the archives, you can see that there was like a 300 foot by 75 foot pegmatite outcrop documented. Nobody ever bothered to assay anything because, who needed lithium? Fury Gold held this property. It was focused mainly on the gold potential. Sometime in October, November, the Ophir Gold people, which has Darren Smith as the exploration VP, and he was also a director. And he, of course, comes from Jody DeRouge's service consulting company. He's totally familiar with Quebec. I first met him when Commerce from the Zimtu group had the Eldor project, which became the Ashram rare earth deposit, which is a significant deposit, except it's in a very remote location. So Darren Smith is sort of the Quebec exploration-focused person. He's the one who generated the idea when the first Lithium Mania 1 boom came along for 92 Resources, which was part of the Zimtu group, to option the Corvette property from the Osisko group, which had absorbed Virginia Mines, which under Andre Gaumond's leadership had focused on all these greenstone belts, and then the property. So even though he was busy with PMET, he had talked to those guys about this, and they ended up doing a deal with Fury that was actually quite reasonable in terms of cash and shares. And next door, they also wanted that property, and that property actually has outcrops, the Mia property, that had been sampled by a private group, Tony Perron's Canadian Mining House, and he had staked this whole belt. It was smart. This was sort of originally for gold, copper stuff, but when the lithium stuff started coming along, he went in there and actually did work to check out these documented pegmatites. And yes, on the Mia property, and they have also about an 8-kilometer segment within a 15-kilometer trend of this Yasinski belt, where they have values up to 2.75% lithium oxide. So these pegmatites in this belt have been confirmed as having lithium in it, as opposed to just being barren kimberlite, or the kind that are closer to the source and are only enriched in beryllium, which nobody really wants. And the Q2 Metals, it was originally a company called Minfocus or something like that, and it changed its name to Queensland Gold, because they acquired the Big Hill Gold Project in the Queensland area of Australia. And the person who was part of this was Blair Way, who is, of course, from that part of the world, and familiar with gold and also familiar with rare earths, because he was part of the whole Tasman leading edge group. And he became CEO of this company. They drilled that property. The gold property came up with so-so results. This is an old high-grade district, orogenic gold. It's tough to get brand new discovery in these districts. But by then, they were starting to understand what the Corvette project was all about. And of course, by late 2021, Blair Way had shifted as become CEO of Patriot Battery Metals and led the exploration of the Corvette trend, which led to the 109 million ton, 1.4% lithium oxide CV5 pegmatite resource estimate that just came out. So he resigned after the lousy results, and the company started watched what he was doing, and he of course resigned because he was becoming very busy in August 2022 with the Patriot Battery story, and they could see what he was doing, and so they went and checked out these greenstone belts and auctioned the property for considerably stiffer terms than Ophir was able to get from Fury Gold, which at the time probably wasn't really thinking too hard about the lithium stuff, but Tony Perron was totally aware of what was happening in the lithium space. So they got the more advanced property. They had done enough work last year that they were prepared to start a 10,000-meter drill program by July. They put their boots on the ground in early June, and they had only 2 days to do sampling and confirm the targets, and then they were kicked out. And the same thing happened with Ophir. They share the same camp. It's run by one of Jody DeRouge's consulting companies, and they had this all coordinated. And then the fire restrictions came, and so they've had to cool their heels for almost 3 months, because this area in the west was more intensively restricted. They only this past week got their boots back on the ground, and they do have this moose hunting window that they're racing to beat to get as much data as possible. Now Q2 Metals has sufficient data and enough outcrop sampled and mapped that they know where to drill. So they will likely, when they get back in the field after October 15th, start this drill program. They'll run it until it gets too hairy with the weather, but they'll have a camp in place to resume in January of next year. And Ophir Gold, it also managed to get a drill permit. I mean, this was the joke. They knew roughly where they were going to need the drill, so they could put in the permit locations with their application. And they get this July 20th, but they couldn't get onto the property to properly define the targets. And in the 2 days they were there, they were able to sample pegmatites and get the high values, confirming, yes, on their part of that greenstone belt, the pegmatites are also LCT type, and it's up to 2%. And they've got Navit and Chow, 2 separate targets. And the one that was documented in 1975, that 300 by 70 foot patch, 100 meters by roughly 25 meters. They weren't able to get to that because, logistically they said, we have all summer to figure this out, and we're starting over here, and we'll get to it. Now they're racing to it because this is clearly a target, and one of the things everybody will be hoping to hear in about 3 weeks. Obviously they'll have their XRF guns and have a rough idea if it's going to be the right time. They'll get their boots on the ground now. They'll get their assays by October 15th. Maybe they'll start drilling. Maybe they'll sit back and wait for January to mount it properly, so they don't have a late in the season. But a key thing with this trend is what's going to be the orientation of the pegmatite dikes? And there's two scenarios. There's what we see with Allchem and its Galaxy Sear system to the south, which is also world-class. They put out a world-class estimate a couple of weeks ago. This is a series of sort of 300, 400-meter long on-echelon dikes side by side, following the dilation zones within a shear corridor. And you need to understand this orientation so that you can properly drill it. The CV5 on the Patriot Battery Metal Corvette ground, it's more an elongated pegmatite that tracks the trend of the greenstone. So once you figure out what you have, you can orient your drilling strategy accordingly. So this is the challenge for Q2 Metals. It's got 2 weeks to figure out where do we put our drills. Are we drilling on echelon dikes, a series of them? Are we dealing with elongated dikes? And from Ophir Gold's point of view, well, they'll learn an awful lot from whatever it is that Q2 Metals learns in those, that second half of October and November and maybe into December, what they learn drilling that. So these two companies, they are poised. We know they've got decent high-grade lithium. We don't know what sort of size. We know they have significant distribution along this trend, so it is fertile for these deposits. And this is all about the rethinking of these ignored pegmatites from decades of past exploration. These are now there for the taking, for the boots on the ground, which is why this boots on the ground rush that's happening right now is so important. And not everywhere has this moose restriction, so those companies will be really scrambling to get as much done. I think we'll see a lot of drilling happening in the first quarter of next year, but right now it's the boots on the ground confirming. What do we have? Do we have LCT type pegmatites? Do we have the basis for raising money to do a major drill program? In the case of Q2 Metals, they raised $10 million earlier this year, and Ophir Gold boosted its treasury with a $3 million financing, so there's $5 million. So these two companies are in excellent shape to weather whatever big picture calamity we get in the market that makes financing difficult. They're in position to drill come hell or high water, and they already know they have the targets. They just need to know precisely how to orient the drill strategy.
John, why did Brunswick Exploration take a beating on Monday?
Well, the week before, Brunswick had a great week after announcing that their boots in the field, and they were able to get into the Mirage property earlier than in the western part because the fire restrictions were lifted in that part. You had to get in there by float plane anyways because it's far too remote. You really wouldn't want to drive there. The Trans-Taiga Highway, you couldn't get to it because the Billy Diamond Highway was still closed. That is the primary is the access to the Trans-Taiga Highway that takes you east. Well, they reported that their boulder train, which originally was 1.7 kilometers, is now 3 kilometers long, but even better, along 2.7 kilometers up ice, they had identified multiple outcropping pegmatites with visible spodumene, and they haven't really bothered to assay any of the boulders because that's too selective. Ideally, you need channel samples, and what's the point of doing a channel sample on a boulder? So there and there, they confirm they have multiple dikes, some of them going in different angles, some of them oriented in this northeast-southwest ice direction, parallel, reasonable widths, and they know they're onto a major discovery, and they applied for a permit and expect to be mobilizing in early September with drilling. The original drilling will be kind of what Q2 Metals will have to do because they'll need to figure out what is the orientation of this. Are we dealing with a series of on-echelon pegmatite dikes, or are they elongated ones where, we see bits here and there, but that's simply because there are pockets of overburden or vegetation covering all of it. So with them, we'll get drill intersections, visuals coming out. So Brunswick is poised to attract an awful lot of attention in September and October. But on Monday, they delivered this cow pie of a news release where they said that while they were, cooling their heels with the fire restrictions in the James Bay area, they sent their boots onto the ground in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, and even parts of Ontario. And much to their dismay, and their strategy had consisted of going through the archives, digging up, finding all these pegmatite documented occurrences, seeing them from satellite imagery, whether they exist or not, and then going there with their XRF gun and shooting and looking for evidence of spodumene, which they could take back to the lab and confirm is spodumene, and they blanked out. And they've talked about having 800 pegmatites in their big portfolio of properties, but when they looked in all these regions, they came up empty 100%. And that shocked the market because it reminded the market that just because something is an outcropping pegmatite, it does not need to be an LCT type of pegmatite. And Brunswick has basically said, well, our focus is now 100% the James Bay region. We know there are world-class deposits, lithium deposits there. We believe we have one at Mirage. We've got the Plex project, the Anatakau project that we need to check out, plus all those pegmatites that we've observed from past work and confirmed with satellite imagery in the James Bay region. Well, we know this region is fertile. Most of them will probably be duds, but here at least we have a good chance. Now, one of them is something really big. And this news, in a sort of strange sense, actually gave Dios Exploration a boost. And Brunswick is a fair spec value rated KRO favorite, while Dios is sort of just bottom fish spec value rated. And what they have done with their strategy is also gone through archives, not so much looked for documented pegmatites, but look for geological context that says this is where pegmatites that are LCT type could occur, and they've used their proprietary till sampling database and their knowledge of glacial history, and put all these data sets together and somehow triangulated the probable location of where there could be serious LCT type pegmatites. And they also use the government lake bottom sediment database, and that's really critical because the glaciers distributed all this stuff, and understanding the glacial history and how far stuff travels is key to understanding the meaning of lake bottom sediment anomalies, because those anomalies do not represent something just immediately below the lake or even slightly up ice. You really have to understand how the glaciers carried everything around and the tributaries filled their various lakes. They have the experience. They've done that. And so now the market's starting to understand that just knowing where pegmatites were documented and where you can see it from satellite imagery, that's not good enough. You have to have additional reasons that when your boots go on the ground, that you have a good shot at finding a proper LCT type pegmatite. And the big, everybody who owns Dios is holding their breath now. The next 2 weeks as they go in the field, will they find nothing, like no pegmatites or anything? Or will they indeed find pegmatites in a context where all their other information says it's not just going to be a flash in the pan like the Hearst pegmatite in Ontario that Brunswick had talked about, or even drilled the 2,000 meters of holes into and found out that it was just a tiny outcrop which pinched out at depth and had no strike extension. It was like a pebble thrown from the sky that splatted onto the earth. No, you want much bigger embedded pegmatites such as the CV5. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Dios Exploration over the next couple weeks. Is the work that Marie-Josée Girard and Arl Desbian have been doing, has that borne fruit? Or are these properties and locations on a map completely avoided by Brunswick? You look where Brunswick's claims are. They're kind of like a halo around the area where Dios Exploration has staked its claims. This will be very interesting to see if this little dark horse emerges as a potential contender to deliver another JADAR equivalent PMET for the James Bay lithium area.
John, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on Kaiser Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at kaiserresearch.com.